5.08 boundary workshop.
Yes, at this time I'd like to invite Mr. Oswald back to the table along with Chris Garrison and her team to talk about boundary-related policies.
And good afternoon again. I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Ms. Garrison, who is leading this piece.
Thank you. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be part of our new superintendent's first board meeting. And we know it's been a long day, so we'll be as brief as possible. I'm here to present to you some proposed changes to sister policies that are related to student assignment and our beloved boundary change process. These changes were first initiated because of the fact that we needed to move the controlled open enrollment provisions out of this policy, one of these policies, and then allow the standalone controlled open enrollment policy that you've recently adopted to prevail. And then in doing so, of course, that provided an opportunity to update the policies, and our friends in the Office of General Counsel had a number of suggestions. For example, some changes to align with new public comment provisions. So I'll quickly walk you through them, and then we'll see if you have any questions. Moving to the slide 3, I think Mrs. Brill will be pleased with this because I remember during the Sunset Palms boundary change, we were very restricted in how that we could do the phase-in provisions, and you were remarking that in a previous school district you had been part of, that was always the protocol. So this basically removes the reference to school concurrency, which prohibited phase-in many cases, such as the Sunset Palms boundary change, and allows us to look at core capacity, the health, safety, and welfare of the students, how the school's functioning, et cetera, and it would enable the board, after consideration of these criteria, to determine whether you wanted to allow a phase-in beyond what you've been currently permitted to do. As I mentioned, we removed the controlled open enrollment procedures. And then another thing that we were finding as staff trying to grapple with very detailed procedural requirements. They were in the two different policies. So what we tried to do is we moved all of the procedural provisions in policy 5.01 and moved it into 5.02 in addition to making some adjustments there. Okay, that's slide 4, Mr. Harris is pointing out. And then are we ready to move on to policy 5.01?
2.
5.01.2, thank you. That's why I have an attorney sitting to my right. This policy pertains to the Advisory Boundary Committee, and this is where we moved all of the ABC procedures so that they're in one place. And the revisions were reviewed by the ABC Committee on March 15th. We were a little bit shy of a quorum, so they were making comments, of course, as individuals rather than as a whole body. But I will, we'll let you know that we did make some changes as a result of that input. With the help of OGC, we were able to update the board of the committee appointee process to be consistent with other advisory committees that you have. Specifically, they come to you as a group, and all the school board appointees come to you as a group, and those are ratified by this body. Towards the area of appointees, the Hispanic Council has agreed to transfer its 2 appointees to the Hispanic Education Coalition, which is a much more active organization with the school district at this point in time. When that provision was put in, it was the Hispanic Council that was more active. And there are some other appointment provisions, and including clarification that ABC members are considered public officials. To the point that we didn't have a quorum at our last meeting, we are recommending changing the quorum procedures to mimic those of Cork. And we checked, and we would have had a quorum at the March 15th meeting if these procedures were in effect. And then beginning on line 201, for board member Quinn that's watching the line numbers, that's where you start seeing the procedural requirements from policy 5.01 come in. There's some other procedural changes that were made, including, in addition, that throughout the boundary process we will be providing the ABC meeting materials to the Diversity and Equity Committee. And then if they have any input they'd like to provide, they will be invited to attend the ABC meetings. And this was put in change as a result of the ABC input. We're also implementing a new ABC speaker card, which is a PBSD form that's going to be incorporated with this policy. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Mr. Barbieri, Mrs. Brill.
Where are we on a revision to 5.011?
What,
That's the
I don't
student
think
residence enrollment requirements.
I don't know that we need, I don't think we identified any changes that are needed. If there's some that you think we should look at, we'd be happy to.
Yeah, I'd like to have you all look at the requirements to prove residency because they're too loose. I've already asked the General Counsel's office to take a look at the list. I'm not comfortable with this affidavit of a parent standing as a guardian. You know, it's just too loose. And, again, I don't want to bore the other board members with my issues in Boca, but Boca High School is a perfect example of a school that's overcrowded, and the parents are convinced that there's probably hundreds of students that don't belong there, and they come in with, documentation that is suspect. And I know that Dr. King is going through a complete check through Nexus Lexis on the students that are there, but some of these things need to be tightened up so that we can have a little more control over who comes and who doesn't. And I know we're bound by the DOJ on immigration students. These are not immigration students. These are students that, that are U.S. citizens that live here and just come up with what I think is faulty documentation to get into overcrowded schools. So if you can bring that back, or Dr. Fenoy, if you could bring that back to the board for some revision chances, appreciate it.
Mrs. Brill and then Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you, and this is such an emotionally charged area. I know that it's always difficult when you go through those cycles, and I have something to bring to everyone's attention that maybe it spans more than one policy, but it really surprised me. In the last one that we had having to do with my area and the closing of Odyssey Middle School, an issue came up having to do with appointees. That when the board members appoint people to the committees, we're not allowed to appoint anyone who's a current employee. So we can't appoint like teachers that are currently teaching to represent us on the committees. Well, what I didn't expect is the teachers in the audience of the meetings came to me and said, why is that teacher on the ABC Boundaries Committee? And it took us a while to track it down. I did speak to Dr. Avosa, and what it was one of his appointees, but the optics on it caused me a lot of angst and aggravation because I had people who are, currently teachers who want to serve on the committees. So I would just ask the superintendent, maybe we need to look at the policy. I know that the superintendent should have more latitude in who they appoint, but the optics on having a current teachers from that school, and that teacher I don't have personal knowledge of, but, has done a good job. But the teachers that are currently at that school were really upset, and they were upset with me for not appointing them to the committee. So I would hope that we could take a look at that somewhere down the road.
Yeah, and Dr. Fenoy, that is not one of the superintendent appointees, but I don't know offhand who appointed her, but we'll check on it.
Right.
Just as a follow-up, Dr. Avosa did come back to me and said it was one of his appointees.
Oh, really? Okay.
So,
Okay.
I don't know.
Right. Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you, and I don't think this needs to be in the policy because I think we corrected it. The last time there were some issues as it relates to something that dealt with my district. But when you're actually getting ready to have a meeting with your boundary committee, it would be nice, and hopefully you will continue doing this, sending the board member the agenda and the packet before the meeting. I've come to the meetings when it was impacting my area, so sometimes you may not be able to attend the meeting, or if you're out in the community with the meeting, you do have a packet that goes out to your members as it relates to whatever the issue is. And I think for board members, certainly myself, and I'm thinking for other board members, that we would get that packet ahead of time so we'll know what's being discussed and we can govern ourselves accordingly as to whether we can attend the meeting.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Dr. Robinson.
So I can't find which policy it is at the moment, but there's language in here about the district recognizing the value, the economic value. Oh, here it is. Which one is this? 5.01, lines 148 forward, based on the school board's finding that promoting socioeconomic diversity of the student population within schools has an educational basis supported by research, da-da-da-da-da. So I have question for legal to follow up on in terms of, and I get all this language, it has to be one of the factors, blah, blah. I think that that's important, right? And especially since our schools have become too often resegregated, that I would like for you to look and see if we can make that a larger factor for ABC to consider. And then my other question, I think this registration form, new and returning student registration, was attached, right?
Yes.
So I don't know how difficult this will be, but if we can add the site of the preschool education, right? I don't know how we do that if we have to start getting numbers. I'm imagining Early Learning Coalition probably has some identifying number that could then be coded into the system. But so then that way we can start looking and providing feedback as we do this work with early childhood. We can provide feedback to the early childhood centers on how their students arrived and how they matriculate through.
We agree, and that's part of one of the initiatives that we're looking at.
Okay.
Any other questions? If not, thank you all very much. And our next topic is community use.
Yes, most